Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for those of you on the West Coast. My name's Steve Nadell, and I wanted to welcome you to the ACEEE Industrial Summer Study. We have several good days of program and discussions for you, and we look forward to your active participation. We're going to be talking about lots of topics, as you could see on this slide, things like strategic energy management, industrial heat pumps, and decarbonized processes will be just some of the many topics that we will be discussing. You just saw the brief video about ACEEE, but to add a little bit more, we do research, whether it's on strategic energy management, heat pumps, or many other topics. We do work on program and policy, both technical assistance and advocacy, whether it's with states, utilities, federal government, Congress, etc. And then we do many education programs, of which this is an example. So we hope you enjoy that. Now, in general, energy efficiency has been making a lot of progress since 1980 when we were formed. We like to think that we contribute to that. We're not claiming all the credit. This particular slide shows current energy use in that orange line, what it would have been if we hadn't done any energy efficiency. And then we split that difference between efficiency and structural change. But just the energy efficiency portion is more than 2,000 per capita in energy bill reduction. So made a lot of progress, but a lot more to do. As we all know, unfortunately, the climate is warming. We're getting more frequent disasters, and we need to be doing something, whether it's a tropical storm that just started up the East Coast this week, the West Coast dryad, or unfortunately a fair number of forest fires already burning out west. ACEEE has done work on looking at what is the efficiency potential, and we have found that energy efficiency can get us halfway there to long-term decarbonization goals. This is from a study just over a year ago, looking at how we can reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 57% and all greenhouse gases by about 50% through efficiency. You can see the green bar is industry, an important contributor to this. Likewise, a couple of weeks ago, the International Energy Agency came out with a new net zero emission scenario. This is a summary from that. They look at overall emissions on the right going down to zero, which means a little bit of emissions in a few sectors. That's the purple, but some CO2 removal to make up for that. That's the blue at the bottom. In the case of industry, you can see the yellow line coming down steadily, and that's one of the sectors that they expect to mostly decarbonize, but we might need a little bit of CO2 removal to offset the rest. Here is from the same study looking at how do we achieve that with industry. That's on the left. You can see energy efficiency is a very large bar in the yellow. Likewise, they have what they call behavior, which in the industrial sector means housekeeping measures and good operations. And they also have fuel switching to electricity. How do we, for medium and low temperature applications, maybe switch to heat pumps and other clean electric options, while for high temperature, we may still need to do others. The kind of gray there is after all this efficiency is done, that's the energy we're going to have to supply with either clean electricity or clean fuels. But I'm sure there'll be more talk about this and various other projections and strategies. And with that, I am happy to introduce the co-chairs of this conference. First, and who will be next up is Dr. Prakash Rao. He's a research scientist within the Buildings, Technologies, and Urban Systems Division at LBL. He conducts research and analysis into the potential for reducing energy consumption and water use in the U.S. Industrial sector while maintaining productivity. His work has supported several DOE programs, including Better Plants, Superior Energy Performance, 50,001 in the Industrial Assessment Centers. This is a summer study. and he has a doctorate in mechanical and aerospace engineering from Rutgers and a bachelor's in mechanical engineering from Carnegie Mellon. With that, please welcome Prakash.
Sorry, chat windows are helpful to know that I am muted. Okay. Thanks, Steve. Hopefully y'all can hear me now, and thanks to the folks who let me know that I'm muted. We welcome all to the 2021 ACEEE Summer Study on Energy Efficiency in Industry. As you probably noticed, you are probably sitting at home right now, and that's because we're virtual this year. But to make up for it, we've really doubled down. We've planned an incredible conference for you all. We have dynamic speakers covering the most pressing challenges related to decarbonizing industry. And it's all going to start now with this wonderful opening. Speakers after all presentations. We have an exciting lineup of speakers. After all the presentations are given, join us for the last 15 minutes of the session as the speakers will answer a few Q&A from the chat. Any remaining Q&As, ACEEE is going to collect them, send them over to the speakers, and respond after the conference. So you have a little bit of opportunity to get your questions answered if you can't get them during the sessions. With this in mind, you'll see the chat box, which I think a bunch of you have been using already, on the right-hand side of your screen. We want to use this chat box only for questions for the speakers. So the hope is that we'll refrain from engaging in dialogue with other attendees. If you'd like to connect with other attendees, however, we have the attendee link, also found on the left-hand column of your page. Any attendee who has created a profile can be found here, and you can communicate with them. Also in this column, you will find attendee resources. These resources contain the conference proceedings, attendee lists, and evaluation survey to complete at the end of the conference. Anyone who fills it out, includes their name and testimonial will get a discount to attend the 2023 summer study. So a little bit of incentive there to do that. And in the program participants link, you'll find information about all the presenters, including bios and copies of their presentations. And lastly, as we mentioned, we've doubled down to make this virtual event as seamless as possible and make us feel like we're actually all together. In that vein, we've organized some end-of-the-day post-panel debriefs to learn about other discussions that you may have missed. So every panel will have a post-panel debrief at the end of the day. The idea is that these are in lieu of those hallway conversations, those mealtime conversations, after-conference conversations. And you have an opportunity to talk to the speakers, talk to each other about the topics you saw today. So to continue the great conversation, share ideas, and do what a conference is all about, conferring. All right, well, that's enough with the housekeeping. Let's get started with our speakers. The first speaker I'm very glad to introduce is Don Stanzak. Don is Vice President of Business Planning and Development for DTE Energy. He is responsible for business planning and generation strategy for DTE Electric, which serves Southeast Michigan and is one of the country's largest electric utilities. In addition, he has responsibility for several operating groups, which include renewable energy, energy efficiency, and community lighting. Prior to this role, Don was DTE's Vice President of Regulatory Affairs, where he developed and managed DTE Gas and DTE Electric's regulatory initiatives before the Michigan Public Service Commission. Don joined MIchCon in 1983. From 1983 to 1994, he held several assignments of increasing responsibility within MIchCon, including financial services, regulatory affairs, corporate planning, gas supply, and supply chain. Since 1994, he has served as a director in several capacities, including market planning, and grants, gas transmission, and storage operations. Don has been in his current role at DTE since 2013. Don earned a Bachelor of Business Administration with a major in Finance from Central Michigan University and a Master of Business Administration with a major in Accounting from Wayne State University, and he also serves as chair of the Junior Achievement of Southeast Michigan. Without further ado, here's Don.
Well, thanks, Prakash, and good afternoon, everyone. And as Prakash said, I'm Vice President of Business Planning and Development at DTE, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all today. Representing DTE as the host sponsor for this year's ACEEE Summer Study on Energy Efficiency in Industry. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to come together with other industry professionals to virtually network and learn. At DTE, we remain focused on and committed to the environment and our energy efficiency efforts. And despite the past year and a half presenting some unprecedented challenges, we've expanded our commitment to provide customers with options to save money and energy through our expanded energy efficiency programs. Now, based on these efforts, DTE's residential and business customers will realize nearly $400 million of savings over their cumulative lifetime energy bills. And along with the dollar savings, the 2020 combined electric and natural gas verified net savings from energy efficiency programs equate to lifetime greenhouse gas reductions of 1.6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide, almost 3,000 metric tons of nitrogen oxides, and about 3,900 metric tons of sulfur dioxide. And now, to enhance our commercial and industrial programs also benefited business owners. These programs offer incentives to replace existing equipment and fixtures with new energy efficient equipment. And in 2020, over 400,000 customer applications were processed within the commercial electric and natural gas programs, and we received 92% or higher customer satisfaction scores. Our energy efficiency efforts are an important part of DTE's mission to provide our customers with safe, reliable, and affordable energy, and we look forward to advancing our energy reduction efforts in the years to come. DTE's mission to get to a clean energy future is one that we share with our keynote speaker today. And I'm really thrilled to introduce Kelly Speaks Beckman, Acting Assistant Secretary for Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. Kelly has many years of experience with clean energy and a strong background in industrial energy issues. In her current role, she leads and directs the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, focused on creating and sustaining American leadership in the transition to a global clean energy economy. Thank you for being with us today, Kelly, and I look forward to hearing your comments.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today to share EERE's programmatic priorities and talk about what are the next steps that we need to take in order to decarbonize industry and, frankly, the entire U.S. economy. For way too long, the energy conversation has been viewed as a zero-sum game on one of trade-offs, that either the climate or the economy. But as you all in this audience have always known, that is certainly not the case. We can do right by people as we do right by the planet. And so we're looking at a $23 trillion global market in the clean energy transition by 2030. It's $23 trillion globally. And we all have a role to play back here in America in securing America's clean energy future. President Biden's clean energy goals are going to put America on an irreversible path to achieve a carbon-free power sector by 2035 and a 100% clean energy economy with net zero emissions no later than 2050. This is the most ambitious climate strategy our nation has ever seen, and we have no time to waste into getting it to work. The urgency of this climate crisis is really reflected in our fiscal year 22 budget request of $4.7 billion, and also in the $3.8 billion House Appropriations Energy and Water Development Subcommittee, or HUDE, bill that was issued just last night. They, while the bill is about $60 million short of our request, it's a little over $900 million more than what we have to spend in fiscal year 21, which also recognizes the urgency of our climate crisis. Our budget request is really a foundation that our nation can build upon to address climate change. And upon this foundation, the American Jobs Plan will also amplify and accelerate our impact. It's a once-in-a-generation injection of funds allocated over a number of years that will allow us to catalyze the investments that are needed to build this clean energy economy. The funding from our budget request and the American Jobs Plan together is an opportunity for industry, for state, for local decision makers to put in place policies and the infrastructure necessary to transition to this economy simultaneously across the US. It allows us to prepare the American clean energy workforce to upgrade and build new infrastructure. So, to guide this transition, we established 5 programmatic priorities in EERE. Our priorities are to decarbonize the electric grid by 2035, decarbonize transportation across all modes, decarbonize the industrial sector, reduce the carbon footprint of buildings, and lastly, to decarbonize the agricultural sector with a focus on the energy-water nexus. Each of these priorities, you'll note, focuses really on a sector rather than a technology. These are the 5 major contributors to our nation's greenhouse gas profile. Our focus, instead of looking just at these technologies, really kind of forces us to do better collaboration with the national labs, other federal agencies, as well as our state and local partners to just make sure that we meet these objectives. Our work will also be driven by 4 cross-cutting principles. First, we have to build this clean energy economy in a way that will benefit all Americans. We have to address environmental injustices that disproportionately affect community of color, low-income communities, and indigenous communities. Environmental justice is highlighted in a number of new initiatives, and we're deeply committed to executing the President's vision that 40% of our investments will benefit disadvantaged communities. The second principle is really working toward a more diverse STEM workforce. We are increasing the awareness of clean energy job opportunities at minority-serving institutions, and we're ensuring that our organizations that receive funding from EERE are also thinking through their diversity and equity plans. Third, we're building out a more robust workforce training opportunities to really build that pipeline for permanent, good-paying jobs for the clean energy workforce. Our workforce investments, sorry about my dog there, also must provide a pathway forward for communities and workers who've risked their lives to produce fossil fuels to begin with. And last, of our principles, we cannot accomplish any of these targets without working closely with and learning from state and local governments. You'll see this in our approach to the entire clean energy transition. But today, I'd like to focus a little bit more on some of the activities and programs we're supporting that will help us to decarbonize the industrial sector. The fastest and the most cost-effective way that we can decarbonize the economy is first to prioritize that transition and start off with a carbon-free power sector. We need to integrate more renewable energy generation onto the grid while ensuring it's reliable, secure, and resilient. Deploying technologies to decarbonize the grid allows us to move more quickly and effectively to decarbonize other sectors, like the industrial sector. Industrial processes currently contribute as much as 28% of the nation's energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. And to address this, we're working to identify a pathway to electrify and improve the energy efficiency of industrial processes first and foremost, to use hydrogen for hard-to-decarbonize industries like steel, and to capture and use emissions. We're developing roadmaps to guide our research and development activities to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across this entire sector. We support approaches using renewable energy and fuels like hydrogen and phase out industrial emissions, and solar thermal for other industrial processes. Our research in this area includes also emerging zero carbon technologies, electrification, electrochemical manufacturing, enhanced drying, direct air capture, and other opportunities for steel, cement, and chemical manufacturing. So our fiscal year 22 budget request for enterprise-wide activities and programs that support the goal of decarbonizing the industrial sector totaled around $799 million, about 17% of the total request. Some of the highlights of our plans for this funding request in fiscal year 22 include $80 million for industrial decarbonization demonstrations, which supports industrially relevant test beds and demonstrations in energy and carbon-intense sectors like the steel, cement, and chemicals. We also put $42 million towards supporting a 7th Manufacturing USA Institute and established 2 additional institutes focused on decarbonizing industrial manufacturing, reducing energy use intensity, and increasing US manufacturing competitiveness. And $70 million we also put into that budget to support a new lab industry consortium to de-risk and validate successful technology and innovations for critical minerals, including testbed facilities to scale up technology solutions around identified gaps, such as metal conversion or magnet manufacturing. So I also wanted to spend a minute to talk about how important collaboration is to decarbonizing not just industry, but every aspect of our economy. By working together through the institutes, hubs, and consortium, and other programs that we have in place, we can reduce duplicated efforts, we can share best practices and lessons learned, and we can gain technical assistance that will ease our transition to this clean energy economy. A great example of this, as I know you all are aware of, is our Better Plants program. It works with leading manufacturers to boost their efficiency, their resilience, their economic competitiveness through making improvements in energy efficiency. The program drives energy savings for public and private sector partners by accelerating investments and sharing successful best practices. Driving energy savings can have a broad impact across the industrial sector, which leads to cost savings and greater resilience and a strengthened workforce, as well as increased global competitiveness. Manufacturing companies and wastewater treatment facilities all partner with Better Plants to set specific energy, water, and waste reduction goals and commits to reducing energy intensity by 25% as a minimum over a 10-year period across all their operations. Better Plants provides support in the form of technical assistance, tools, resources, and national recognition to help partners achieve their goals and to get recognized for them. To date, more than 250 industrial organizations have joined Better Plants and pledged to reduce energy intensity across their facilities, and that number is continually growing. With over $8 billion and 1.7 quads in savings to date from the collective achievements of the Better Plants partners, the program continues to drive efficiency, resilience, and competitiveness across U.S. manufacturing. So, just in closing, we have a lot of work to do to transition the United States to a clean energy economy, and decarbonizing industrial processes is a big component of that. It's an all-hands-on-deck sprint against climate change, and we can't afford to waste any time. So I look forward to working with partners like ACEEE to drive more energy-efficient processes into the market and to reducing the emissions across our entire economy. Thanks for your time. Hi, guys.
Oops. Hi, all. Thanks, Kelly. Thank you, Don. And thank you, Steve, for those great comments. I think now we'll head into Q&A. So this is your time, folks, to ask questions of Kelly, Steve, and Don. And remember to use the chat window on the right-hand side here. Or maybe it's the left-hand side. I think I'm looking at a different view. Use the chat window. Send us questions. And we'll send them, and we can ask Kelly, Don, and Steve. So while you guys are getting your questions together, maybe I'll get us started. Kelly, to you. You mentioned Better Plants, but I thought maybe we could go a little bit deeper into where do you see energy efficiency fitting in the solutions and breakthroughs needed for industrial decarbonization?
Well, first of all, I would just respond with efficiency really being the foundational first step that you have to take in order to meet decarbonization. It's the cheapest, quickest, least reversible way to decarbonize. But efficiency can't do it alone. We need the grid to also decarbonize, and we need more fuels available as well. So efficiency is one of the 4 major pillars that we're pursuing for industrial decarbonization, including also electrification, carbon capture, and low carbon fuels. It's really a very important part of, well, one of 4 parts of getting to that decarbonization.
Yeah, that's great. I think we all would agree efficiency is the way to go to start us off. And it looks like we got a question from an audience member here. And I think probably, Kelly, this is for you. Can you speak to distributed energy generation and Biden's desire to add more long-distance transmission lines for infrastructure?
I'd love to. So I think this is an all-hands-on-deck sprint, as I mentioned earlier, and this is not one choice over another. we are doing a lot of work on distributed energy resources, including up to and including, distributed solar, distributed geothermal resources, energy storage on site. There is a lot of work that we're doing all the way from early stage research all the way through deployment. But that's not the only thing. We also have a very cost competitive grid scale solar market, as well as wind, land-based wind, that really, in order for us to use the grid as efficiently as we possibly can, we have to be able to get that grid scale generation, clean generation from one area to the other. And so that's why long distance transmission is also a part of this strategy, because we're really trying to collapse the time that it's going to take to decarbonize. Getting our grid to 2030 to decarbonize by 2035 and getting the entire economy by 2050 is going to be an all hands on deck.
That's great. And Don, maybe I'll ask you as well, with your role at DTE and at a utility, any thoughts on this idea of adding more long distance transmission lines for infrastructure to support distributed energy generation?
Well, I certainly think it's something worth reviewing, because I do think that as we get to more renewables, we're going to have mismatches in terms of available generation and the demand for generation. And so I think that having the ability to more efficiently move the electricity from where it's being generated to where it's needed, we're going to need those capabilities going forward.
Certainly agree. Next question from the audience, and this is for Kelly and Don. The decarbonization roadmap seems great and very much needed. Can you talk about how much this will impact utility rates for industrial customers? Do you see that staying neutral, increase, or decrease, and if you know by what percent, in the short and long run? And appreciate your thoughts.
Don, this question seems made for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'll try. So obviously affordability is an important consideration for anything we do. And we're in the process right now of reviewing what does that transition look like, and how can we do it in a responsible way that we have, it's safe, reliable, and cost effective. And what I will say is, I believe that technology, and this isn't, we're planning based on hope, but I believe technology will evolve, and something or some combination of things will continue to become less expensive. And you really just need to look at wind and solar to reinforce that, because 10, 15 years ago, if you would have told me we'd be where we are today with wind and solar, I wouldn't believe it, right? So I think the advancement of technology and industrial size applications of new technology will help in terms of impact on rates. But there will be pressure on rates, to be sure.
I agree. I agree with Don in that technologies are advancing, and if you just look at grid scale solar and wind, it's less expensive than many of the traditional resources that are out there in certain parts of the country. What we're really trying to do is get solar and wind to be less expensive, or on the research side, is get it less expensive than any resource. And with the addition of energy storage, grid energy storage, onto the grid, both in what we see today in the 4-hour battery type applications, all the way through long duration storage, we really can get more use out of the assets that we're investing in, which will help bring down ultimately consumers' costs. And that's really an important part. Yeah, as a former regulator from the state of Maryland, I think about that a lot. We're not necessarily just trying to get the best new widget. We're really trying to figure out how can we use all of these widgets, and how can we integrate them in a way that's going to be good for the short term in terms of cost, and good for the long term in terms of our health and the earth.
Yeah, Kelly, I totally agree on the storage. That is going to be a key going forward, and it's going to be short-term storage, long-term storage, some broad combination that's really going to make a difference.
Yeah, and certainly with all the minds at this conference doing research and technology development, policies and programs, I'm pretty optimistic that we'll be able to make it affordable as well and clean. For our next question, I think this is probably for everyone. So maybe I'll start with Don. Can you talk about the potential and any existing plans for energy and industrial firms to work with policymakers to transition workforces towards zero carbon job functions? And while it's for Don, of course, Kelly and Steve, please, we'd love to hear your responses on this as well.
Well, I think I'm going to answer in a different way, and we can go from there. One key thing for us is, as we retire coal plants, what impact does that have on our own employees and the communities where our coal plants operate? And for DTE, that's probably a more direct concern or area of focus that we have relative to carbon reduction. And I'll also say that many of our industrial customers are taking advantage of our voluntary renewable plan, and that really is not impacting their employees per se. It's just getting them cleaner energy.
I would say it's something at DOE that we think about a lot in terms of this transition of our economy. And I'll just take an example of geothermal as a resource, and large-scale geothermal as much as the distributed. Because when you think about what's necessary to bring that heat up at the ground, that's drilling, right? So, is there a good way that we can provide funding and resources for workforce training to transition some of those oil and gas drillers into the geothermal side, really, and then because they know how to do this, frankly, we need a little more work done on how we can more efficiently drill for hot water. So we see that as one good example of how we are trying to transition the workforce into clean energy.
How about Steve? I know ACEEE has generated energy efficiency jobs reports and talking about the workforce benefits of energy efficiency. Any thoughts from ACEEE and you on this idea of industrial decarbonization and what it might mean for transitioning jobs and our future workforce?
Yes, I mean, we see energy efficiency as an important contributor to these efforts. So as we expand energy efficiency, that's more jobs, whether it's for people in the energy management department and people, installing, maintaining measures. Also, efficiency reduces costs, so the businesses have a little bit more money to invest in their core business, helping to expand jobs. So we see efficiency as an important job creator. In addition, how do we retrain people who are working in different areas that may be fade out? We see a lot of opportunity for industrial heat pumps, for example. These are complicated pieces of equipment. It's not just, a high school graduate will quickly start taking a wrench to them. We need training there. There's a lot of discussion about expanded hydrogen networks. We now have hydrogen networks along the Gulf Coast through Louisiana and Texas, but those will probably expand to help meet some of the high temperature process needs of industry. And that's going to create a whole bunch of jobs. So we see a whole variety of jobs being created. And yes, we need to do the job training and the transition so that people who are in present jobs that will decline have opportunities to move into these new areas, but perhaps even more importantly, that their kids will have new opportunities for viable careers in their local communities.
Thanks. Maybe we'll stick it with you, Steve, and I think this question would be for Kelly and Don as well, but we'll start with Steve. In your work looking at industrial decarbonization, I know ACEEE had a recent report or analysis of it. Where does nuclear power play into it? One of our audience members is asking. How does that fit into the industrial decarb vision?
Okay. Nuclear power is by and large electricity at this point. Yes, you could debate about whether you'd get some high temperature heat, but I'm not hearing people propose a nuclear reactor in an industrial plant. So it is one mechanism to help get carbon-free power to power all these heat pumps and all the other electrification opportunities we've been mentioning.
Kelly, and DOE's roadmaps and the priorities you outlined, where does nuclear power fit into all those?
So for DOE, I mean, it is a source of carbon-free electricity that is dispatchable, and so we are looking to do whatever we can in the research all the way through deployment of safe nuclear power, including some of the smaller modular nuclear power, so we can look to make sure that it's more affordable. That is done through our nuclear energy office, and they're continuing to do that work.
And Don, how about at DTE? Is this I probably should be more familiar with sort of the nuclear power plants and DTE network, but is that part of your company's solution?
Well, we have a nuclear plant that represents about 10% of our capacity. About 20% of our energy is produced by our nuclear plant. And we're certainly monitoring, in particular, the small modular reactor development. And at the point that it becomes cost effective, I think we would pursue another unit. But right now, they're pretty expensive.
Certainly agree with that. And maybe we'll stick it with you, Don. We got a great question from an audience member here. He'd like to hear more about DTE's industrial renewable energy plans. He says it sounded like Don said that more industrial customers were taking advantage of them, and audience member would like to hear more if time allows. Thoughts about the industrial renewable energy plans that you have?
Well, so we have both industrial and commercial residential voluntary renewable plan where customers can sign up for any percent of their load that they want to come from renewables. And frankly, we've been oversubscribed. We can't build enough renewables to supply the demand. So it's really been a great program. We have a mandate in the state where we had to have 15% of our power come from renewables, but with the voluntary plan, we've gone well beyond that. So it's been a great program for us and for our customers in the state.
Fantastic. And kind of building off of that, and maybe Kelly, start with you, but this a vision question here. So I guess we have to think out of the box here. Have Kelly and Don and Steve, have you guys considered a demonstration program or just ideas, I guess, where industrial facilities can become energy hubs and supply neighboring plants, community houses, and buildings with clean heat and power? So I guess, you know, almost like the industrial facility is supplying its community with energy. Maybe it's renewables, maybe it's heat, maybe it's chilled water, but really being part of that community energy network. Has any thoughts on that?
I love that question. As a matter of fact, I cut and paste it and put it into my notes over to the left-hand side. We certainly, out of our advanced manufacturing offices, we have a number of demonstration and deployment type activities. One of them is what we call the industrial assessment centers, where we interact with the colleges, universities, even community colleges nearby, and we bring students in to help give free assessments, energy assessments, to the local industrial facilities. And that's how we begin to get them involved in energy efficiency, and we begin to try to develop that workforce. But we're looking for all kinds of new great ideas for community interaction, and so that's why I cut and paste it. So I think that's a cool idea. Yeah,
I definitely agree. Really neat idea, and hopefully help the community and the manufacturers. I don't know, Don and Steve, is this something you guys have, maybe Don within Detroit or the Michigan area, is this something you're seeing? And I know there's many auto plants in Michigan, and they will often help their customers, whether it's water or the communities. But have you seen this kind of idea?
Yeah, I think this is the kind of thing that we have been interested in. And for example, we actually own a small generating facility at a Ford location where we provide basically heat, hot air, hot water for them, and produce power for the grid. And I think as we go forward, things like that will be even more attractive, because I believe the solution going forward is not one thing, but it's many different things that fit various needs of the grid and our customers and the specific location. And so I think we need to be open to a variety of different combinations and structures as we further decarbonize.
Yeah, I think it speaks to that question earlier about affordability, right? So trying to find the most affordable solutions, and maybe that's coming from the industrial plants, and
right.
Maybe it makes it more efficient, right, for using their waste heat elsewhere. Steve, I don't know if you had thoughts on this idea of sort of community energy or distributed energy with the manufacturing plant at the center.
Yes, I do think it is a possibility. Bear in mind, however, that we need to think about the residents near the plants and whether if this is going to mean, additional combustion, what it means for them. Hopefully we are talking clean fuels, but we have to, while there's potential, we do need to think about the surrounding communities as well.
Great point. Well, I maybe another question here, and I know, and this will be for everyone, but I know, Kelly, you did talk very specifically, you talked about carbon capture, storage, sequestration. Any thoughts? And maybe we'll start with, start back to you, Steve, to maybe highlight that question and get your take on it. Carbon capture, storage, and sequestration, its role on, in terms of decarbonization.
It will be an important role, but I think in particular it's carbon capture utilization. How do we incorporate as much of this carbon as possible into products that are long-lived? That will, wherever we can do that, that would be great, as opposed to trying to figure out, gee, nearby an industrial plant, is there some place to inject it into the ground? Yes, there will be some places where we're going to have to store it, but as much as possible, can we utilize in some type of useful product, among other things that helps pay for the capture. I'm not saying we'll pay for all of it in all cases, but it will help.
And Kelly, maybe throw it to you on that idea. Within DOE's efforts, the idea of carbon utilization within products across the economy. Any thoughts?
Absolutely. There? We have a number of initiatives already underway, even from the last administration, on plastics, for example, and industrial decarbonization. While it may not have been called that in the last administration, there has been some work on it. And we're working with the Fossil Energy Office on much of our decarbonization strategy to make sure that we are including that as one of the 4 pillars. And I will say, I just called it the Fossil Energy Office, but they've changed their name to the Fossil Energy and Carbon Management Office.
Oh, great.
That gives you any idea as to the overall administration goals.
That's fantastic to hear. I'll just make a note. Steve had a prior commitment at 3 Eastern, so he had to jump off. But I think we have Kelly and Don here with us for another, I think, 15 more minutes. So I'll turn the question to Don within DTE's portfolio, and as you look forward to DTE's sort of carbon footprint, does carbon capture have a role within DTE's portfolio?
Well, I think it certainly may, particularly in light of where we operate and the geology in Michigan. I understand the idea of being able to use the carbon, but I think we could also store it in Michigan as well. We have a lot of depleted oil and gas facilities, a lot of pipelines, just a lot of infrastructure that I think could potentially be redeployed either for carbon capture or for hydrogen. And we're well aware of the complications in terms of manufacturing and storing hydrogen, but both of those are, carbon capture and hydrogen, are things we're looking at going forward. And I think DT in particular, given the facilities we own and the geology in Michigan, provides some opportunities for us going forward.
That's great. That's great.
I love that you brought up the hydrogen. It's an important element for decarbonization of industry, but also like when you think about going across the entire economy, it's going to have a good role in heavy duty long haul trucks, right? That seems to be a very promising technology. And so part of the American Jobs Plan, or the BIF, as people are calling it now, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Framework, having hydrogen be a part of that is going to be important to fund what we've set up as a goal through a hydrogen Earthshot to hit $1 per kilogram of clean hydrogen, meaning 1 kilogram of carbon per every kilogram of hydrogen within the next decade. And that's how we set a goal, start working towards it, start funding that, and take advantage of the existing infrastructure that we already have so that we don't have to reinvest. I mean, we'll have to add some money to it, but use what we've got, right?
Yes, exactly.
And Kelly, I love the specific targets around that to really drive us towards thinking about where do we need to go rather than sort of talking about in broader terms. Having that target really kind of helps motivate us, I think, as a community to get working on that topic. And I guess a follow-up question, because we did kind of go to hydrogen. One attendee wanted to follow up on that question and ask about viability of currently proposed brown hydrogen plants with CCNS. And I assume brown hydrogen, you guys correct me if I'm wrong here, is maybe hydrogen not generated with renewable electricity, but still dirty, maybe. Any sort of thoughts on that sort of hydrogen generation, combining it with CCNS?
Well, I think I choose to answer it in the manner that we're trying to get across all of EERE, but indeed across all of Department of Energy, trying to get that hydrogen as clean as we possibly can. I don't want to call it binary clean or dirty hydrogen. I feel like that's not as useful, because we're really trying to get ourselves to a goal where we can have 1 kilogram of carbon dioxide for every kilogram of hydrogen. That is a low enough area for us to really clean up the air. And so that's where we're spending our money and our efforts, to really see how we can get that as clean as we possibly can, and as cheap as we possibly can.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree. Here's an interesting one that I don't hear too often, but I think is could really drive back on the efficiency point. Don or Kelly, and Kelly in terms of maybe the R&D that and sort of some of the code development DOE engages in, particularly on the building side, and Don maybe as part of DTE programs. Do you think there's value in creating a code for major industrial operation equipment, things like compressed air and boilers? Do you see that as having a role? So codes for the industrial sector, like we see codes in the building sector.
I certainly think it's interesting, because when you think about codes and appliance standards as well, it really sets the floor, right? It sets where you expect the industry to be, whether that be a residential building or a commercial building, and yes, even in industrial buildings. It's not something that we're saying is going to happen right now, but we're certainly taking a look at how we have interacted in the past with codes development. We don't develop codes, but we certainly analyze them, and we put word out to states. And so we expect to continue that on the residential and commercial side. And I think it's an interesting question as to whether codes could help set that floor and potential direction for industry as well.
Yeah, I agree. One thing we've learned here in our shop is the leadership U.S. has taken in sort of motor codes, and how that's really driven the international community and others to really wildly improve the efficiency of motor systems, and both in commercial and industrial settings. Don, any thoughts on codes and the role of codes within some of DTE's programs for its customers?
Well, I tend to agree with Kelly. I think it's an interesting question. I will say that we've really done well in terms of expanding our energy efficiency programs with industrials, and in particular, what we working with them to tailor specific applications for their own needs. But I think it is an interesting question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep. Here's a question on carbon pricing. Do you see a future role for industrial decarbonization requiring private sector carbon pricing markets at some point? in a similar way as has been considered for power generation markets or large emitter clean air asset programs. So I guess the question is about carbon pricing. Is that something you guys see as having a role in our decarbonization, maybe spur deployment and technology uptake, or is that something that either DTE or DOE is looking at?
Well, certainly as part of the American Jobs Plan, there was a clean energy standard proposed in the president's plan. We're absolutely supportive of such a plan. It wasn't put forward in the bipartisan the bipartisan infrastructure framework, but as a former chair of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, I can tell you I'm a pretty big fan personally of market-based solutions that can help us move towards decarbonization. It seems to me to be quite an interesting way to get everyone to have some ownership in this, and really seeing how you can make yourself more competitive through a mechanism such as that. But if we're going to do it, I think really to be as impactful as possible, it would need to be an economy-wide, similar to what California has in their in their structure, where they really look at a carbon economy-wide decarbonization for their state, as opposed to just focusing on the grid. It's only one part it's an important part of the equation, but it's only one part of the equation if we're going to hit real decarbonization.
I agree. Don, any thoughts there on carbon pricing within DTE markets?
Well, I really agree with Kelly that it could be workable and it could help and it could point us in the right direction, but the devil's in the detail, right? And if we get it wrong, I think it could just create waste and confusion. So the key would be that it's got to be structured the right way.
Certainly. Don't want to add more problems. I want to only create solutions. And Kelly, I think there's a great question here for you. A little bit of a flip, but you did mention critical materials and DOE's focus on sort of these rare earths and things that you need for the renewable energy technologies. And a question comes in. I think you hit on this, but maybe you could just expand it a little bit more. How does EERE consider the international supply chain and raw material supply concerns of some of these renewable technologies, as noticed by the new Biden-Harris Supply Chain Disruptions Task Force? Is the DOE considering the holistic international sustainability effects of our energy transition? So I guess the supply chains, and just this panel one is low as agile supply chains and flexibility. So I think this is a good question to lead into our conference.
But it's such an incredible and important question, especially just finally coming out of COVID and recognizing the importance of agility in our manufacturing processes. That's a super important question. Yes, we are absolutely re-engaging in the international sphere of how we work with our supply chains. We're taking stock of what our natural resources here are in the US and how we can bring as much domestic manufacturing, assembly, and workforce back home to the United States as we work through this. That's why one of our 4, critical principles is around workforce and around state and local, because that's an area where we especially have to coordinate to really understand what are the local resources and the local requirements in order to develop this supply chain that folks are going to be able to support.
Fantastic. I think we have time for one more question here. Let's see. So yeah, I guess part of the whole decarbonization. This is a tough question. So why don't we end on a visioning question? Embodied carbon. So how does metrics around thinking about the carbon in the products we make and use, and how can we, if we start thinking about embedded metrics, how can that spur innovation and decarbonization?
Don, your turn.
That's beyond I'm sorry, that's just mind blowing.
It's a tough one, I know, but we got a smart audience here. So.
Great question, but I have no answers.
It's also an important question. I would say, we're starting out our planning with really more of a scope 1 and a scope 2 in terms of decarbonization, and scope 3 is also an important part of that. But again, we've got to phase it in order to get ourselves moving along. And so we haven't, frankly, done as much as we probably need to, not probably, absolutely need to, on the embedded carbon. I know that we have a lot of our labs working on that. But in terms of deployment and working towards plans for that, I can't say that we have really taken that on to the level that it needs to be. We're really trying hard to make sure we've got a plan for scope 1 and scope 2, and then moving on.
That's going to be a big enough task as in and of itself.
Yeah.
And I guess just to conclude, maybe just some thoughts. Maybe start with Don and then Kelly, and then we can close out the opening plenary year. Thank you so much for your time. This has been a great Q&A, great presentations, and I think our audience is really going to be motivated to work on this topic, and you're setting the right tone for us. But what gives you optimism? You guys, we know this challenge is huge, right? So when you look forward and in your work, what gives you optimism that we're going to meet it? And I'll start with you, Don.
Well, I sort of touched on it earlier, that when I think back 10, 15 years ago, if you would have described 2021 in terms of the level of renewables that we have at DTE, the amount of energy reduction that we've achieved through energy efficiency, I wouldn't have believed it. And so if I look back over the last 10 years and see what's been accomplished, that gives me a lot of excitement that we're going to do even more and faster going forward.
That's great. We got a good glide path. And Kelly, we'll leave it with you. What gives you optimism here on all the challenges you outlined?
What gives me optimism from the vantage point? There's a lot of things to be optimistic about. The work has been continued even in the last several years, just more quietly. So what really gives me the most optimism is hearing my team at EERE and all the work that they've been doing. Anyone who's stayed in the last several years has been heroes, in my opinion. And they are now bringing those programs and projects to light, and we are funding them, and we're getting to work. The other thing that gives me optimism is really unbundling the labyrinth of the federal government and how difficult has been to engage with us. We are really doing our best to have a whole of government approach, to open our doors, to speak real people English so that we're understandable. I think that sort of outreach and that sort of whole of government approach and the work that frankly the EERE team has done over the last several years, even in the toughest of circumstances, gives me tremendous optimism that we can hit this goal.
I agree. Great work is happening and has been happening, and it's great to keep charging ahead and get all the support. And with that, I think that's a great point to kind of end the opening plenary. Thank you again, Kelly and Don, so much for your time today. I think this has been a wonderful plenary, and thank you to the attendees for joining. And I think we're all going to clap in our rooms for you. Thank you so much. And have a great rest of your evening. And to the attendees, please continue on to the welcome reception. We're going to have some fun little activities there, and I'll see you in a minute. Take care, all.